Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Compasa. Today I'm going to go through a PowerPoint presentation of the Darfur conflict. I think that perhaps the PowerPoint presentations might be a better way to uh, make a more entertaining or perhaps a more lively video so you guys don't get bored of my monotone voice. We can try it. We can try it. It takes a little bit of time, but I kind of enjoy doing this presentation. So, the Darfur War, genocide, Arab supremacy, and climate change. Why did I put these subtitles there? Well, because between 2003 and 2008, there was a genocide in Darfur by Arab militias that were supported by the Khartoum government in in Sudan. And Arab supremacy is a vital component in the ongoing war in the area, because that's the ideology that they were brainwashed with. That is to say, the Janjaweed, or now as they're called, the RSF. However, the RSF have probably undertaken a more fluid way of fighting, I guess, because they are fighting as mercenaries. Well, they were fighting as mercenaries in the Saudi-led aggression against Yemen. So they were actually fighting the original Arabs, so to speak. And then you got the component of climate change. And it's also one of Africa's forgotten wars. Nobody really talks about what's going on in Sudan and in particular in Darfur. But we're going to dive into it. And to understand the Darfur conflict, you have to go back to the Libyan Chad War, the Libyan Chadian War, basically. This is known as the Toyota War because the Chadians were implementing, or they received a bunch of Toyota Hiluxes, I believe, and this is considered the most reliable car in the world, right? And it's been used ever since in almost every insurgency in Africa and in the Middle East. I believe it's also been used in Nicaragua by the Sandinistas. But it's a very durable and reliable car. I'm not going to talk too much about the car itself, but let's proceed. So, Muammar Gaddafi, he had ambitions to annex the Aouzou Strip, which is to the border of Chad. It's like the south of Libya and north of Chad, basically. The claims to the strip dates back to conflicting European treaties from 1955, 1935, and 1899. The Aouzou Strip is a very mineral-rich area, and is said to have a lot of rich uranium deposits. So you can understand why Gaddafi wanted this strip back. Besides European border, like border drawings, a lot of these borders don't really make any sense in the Middle East and Africa, but it is what it is, unfortunately. In combination with the fact that this area is very resource rich, it can you can figure it out why Muammar Gaddafi wanted that area back, or Libya at this time, so to speak. During this period, Chad had a civil war. It was between the Christian president Franco Tombalbaye and the Muslim Front organization. So it was a Muslim-dominated anti-government insurgency force, and Front received backing from Libya against President Tombalbaye. In the 1970s, it was discovered that Libya had backed a coup against Tombalbaye, and he severed all ties with Libya. So in a retaliatory move, Tombalbaye invited Libyan opposition to Chad and laid claims to the Fezzan region in Libya, using the same logic as the Libyans did for the Aouzou Strip. In 1975, Tombalbaye was ousted in a coup by General Noël Milarou Odingar and the previously jailed military officer, General Feliz Maloum, who became president. Now, Maloum allied himself with Hassan Abre, a Tebu militia, Islamic militia commander. He had split with the Frolion because he wasn't too friendly with Libya. He didn't like the Libyans very much. So they both agreed to fight against Libya. And Maloum appealed to both the UN and the Arab community for support against Libya, especially after Libya increased its support for the Front. The problem here was, though, that the Chadian army was very poorly equipped. So, and Libya had tanks and helicopters from the Soviet Union, which they obviously also, armed their Front allies with. The Front would advance against the Chadian army and capture the city of Faya Largou in 1978. And we're going to look on a map where that is. And as you can see here, before I go to the next slide, this is a Toyota Hilux, I believe. And these are very mobile, right? Very durable, very mobile. You can just attach, an anti-tank or anti-aircraft weapon on it, or a machine gun, and it's good to go. Easy to repair too. Anyway, side note, by the way, after this betrayal of Hassan or Hissène Abre, Gaddafi kind of like went all in against the Tebu people in the Fezzan. He expelled many of them, but it was also, according to many different sources, that it was out of like racist reasons. He considered them black, so to speak, and because Gaddafi had a pretty funny view of who was Arab, right? That could include some black people, such as the Zakawa, the Tuaregs. The Tuaregs aren't black. Some of them are black. They're mixed, many of them. But yeah, it's kind of weird. But anyway, it is what it is. He didn't trust the Tebu people. He considered them. I assume he considered them like agents of Chad or whatever. But anyway, Faya Largu was defended by 5,000 troops, but the Front had a armor advantage. So after the city fell, the Libyan army and the Front continued south. Moreover, 2,500 Chadians were taken prisoner, and the Chadian army had effectively been decimated. It was the Battle of Ati, and Ati is here. Faya Largu is here, right? About 300 miles north of the Chadian capital, in N'Djamena, that the Front advanced was finally halted. And not by forces of Chad, but rather the French Foreign Legion forces in the presence of the French Air Force, whom the Libyans refused to engage with out of fear of escalating the conflict. This is also because during this time, Libya had a lot of like trade with France, and they didn't want to mess that relationship up. So, yeah. Anyway, Maloum, Abre, and Goukouni, the leader of the Front, became the three key Chadian players in the region. After the Libyan and Front defeat at Ati, Maloum and Habre both had significant forces in N'Djamena. Goukouni also still had a sizable force in Faya Largu. However, his relationship with the Libyan troops collapsed after he refused to adopt the Green Book. And the Green Book is Muammar Gaddafi's version of kind of like Mao's little red book, where he outlines his political and economic philosophy and whatever. I've read it before. It was a long time ago. I probably should read it again if I have time. But yeah, it was also like how to like run. He was trying to use the Green Book a lot of times to almost like guidance, right? How to run a country. He wanted to create this huge Jamahariya across the Sahara or whatever. But we might get to that later. So, but anyway, Gaddafi started switching his support to Ahmed Assil, an Arab Chadian warlord. The tension escalated into violence when Asil attacked and was defeated by Gukuni. Then the Battle of N'Djamena erupted between the forces of Malum and Habre. In the midst of this chaos, Gukuni Frolian entered the city to fight on the side of the Muslim Habre against the Christian Malum. So, having forced Malum to retreat to the south, Gukuni and Habre then were faced with an attempt by Asil and the Libyan advance from the north. With the country increasingly falling into anarchy and regional warlords emerging, Nigeria would host several peace conferences in the aftermath. In these peace conferences, it was agreed that Malum would resign and Gukuni would become president, with Hassan Habre serving as defense minister, Asil as foreign minister, and Malum loyalist Kumuge as vice president. This unity government would last not that long. I'm sorry if I butcher any names here, so my bad. The treaty stated that the remaining French troops were to be replaced with African Union troops, and amid this transition, Habre's militia would renew their fighting against Asil's and Gukuni's militias, and finally in 1981, Gukuni asked for Gaddafi's assistance to defeat him. So that's despite him not accepting the Green Book. Libyan troops were airlifted closer to N'Djamena, and faced with the Libyan army, Habre was evicted from the capital. But Habre did not give up. He fled to Sudan, but like I said, he promised to come back. This was coming during the civil war. Habre would actually come back sooner than he expected. So in 1981, Gukuni and Gaddafi issued a joint communication stating a common goal of unity between Libya and Chad. This was met with something approaching horror by the rest of the world, even though most of the Chadian government, and it is likely that Gukuni was effectively forced into communique. And he had to walk back that statement under international pressure, right? Still, pressure mounted despite Gaddafi claiming that his troops were in the country to keep the peace. He agreed to withdraw from all of Chad except Aouzou Strip. More African peacekeepers were promised to fill the void. Nobody had put their bets on Habre. Habre's own militia, the FAN, had received support and training from Sudan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the CIA. In its exile, during its exile, basically, right, and was now a formidable force. Upon the withdrawal of the Libyan military, Hissène Habre saw his chance, and he raced across the border with his army, taking both the important city of Abche and the capital within months. Gukuni fled into exile, and Vice President Kamuge also fled after Libyan help didn't materialize. Hissène Habre, also known as the African Pinochet, declared that he's now the president of Chad, less than 2 years since he had left. Habre began rolling north to reclaim his country. Libya was still kind of hesitant to intervene, though. They would end up supporting Gukani in rebuilding a militia to retake N'Djamena from Habre. At another battle at Faya Largu, Habre was defeated and called France for help. Sometimes I don't know what the fuck I'm writing here, man. But anyway, France during this point was doing the international diplomatic equivalent of forlorn sigh, and essentially drew a line in the sand. I think France was kind of hesitant to get into this conflict due to its good relationship with Libya too, but they couldn't lose Chad at the end of the day. So there was a split in Chad, along the 50th parallel between Habre and Gukuni in 1984. And the next years would be relatively quiet as Habre would work to rebuild his army and plan for a new offensive. There is potential in the counterfactual of a permanently partitioned Chad, but it was not to be. By 1987, Gukuni's forces had largely deserted, and Libya had lost much of its legitimacy. In both 1986 and 87, Habre, with French support, launched invasion of the north, with him now being able to reframe the civil war as being a fight against foreign invasion. In contrast to the defeated army of 1978, the Chadian army of 1987 consisted of 10,000 well-trained, patriotic, and motivated soldiers. So that's how they managed to defeat the Libyans. It was that period in 1984 where the country was split, but it was a calm period, and Habre had time to rebuild his forces and then go on the offensive with the support of the French and obviously the Americans and the Saudis. But anyway, let's go back at this. They had been supplied, and here we go. They were supplied with brand new Toyota pickup trucks and Milan anti-tank missiles by France. And this is where the Toyota War would get its name from, right? The Chadians at this time had also learned that pickup trucks would not set off a Libyan landmine if they were moving at over 100 kilometers per hour when they drove over them. Man, these people, they were playing with their lives, bro. I wouldn't do some crazy shit like that. But anyway, the Libyans, numbering up to 8,000 men, 300 tanks, and other forces in the Strip, were poorly motivated and led. Yes, they were, and we're going to get into that because, well, a lot of the fighters wasn't just Libyan army. There were also Islamic legionnaires, or Islamic Legion, as we will get into later. And a lot of them were, migrant workers from South Asia and other parts of Africa, and they didn't really come there to fight a war in some desert. They came there to work and get money. But hey, this is one of Gaddafi's main mistakes, man. And a lot of Arab leaders, unfortunately, haven't been in the modern era, so to speak, very good military leaders. Many of the Arab armies have historically been very disorganized. I'm talking about the modern era, not during the time of Khalid ibn Walid and whatever. There are exceptions to the rule, obviously. You have the Ansarullah in Yemen. You have Hezbollah, which is the only Arab army that defeated Israel. But that's another topic we can get into another day. We'll do another PowerPoint presentation of Iran's military capabilities and their allies within the region. But regardless, the decisive Battle of Fada in January 1987 saw the Chadians use their speed and knowledge of the area and flank and destroy the Libyan armor at their communications base at Fada. And using these Toyota Hiluxes, they're very mobile in the desert, right? And you can quite easily destroy a lot of tanks with these Toyotas if you arm anti-tank missile weapons on them, for example. But we're seeing this in modern day era too, that low tech equipment can actually beat or win you the war or the battle, because killing a bunch of people is not just the only way to conduct a war. You can kill a bunch of people, but can you win the war? Can you win the battle necessarily? You have to look at the cost of producing things. So, for example, Hellfire missiles cost millions, thousands of dollars to launch, and then you have millions to create and whatever. While, for example, a drone can cost up to what? $2,000, $3,000, maximum maybe $10,000. And it's going to do a lot of damage. So I mean, it's also a matter of military economics here, right? And during this context, Libya had a lot of expensive equipment, expensive perhaps, but they had more so expensive equipment than the Chadians from the Soviet Union. Why I'm saying why I was doubting the word expensive is because, okay, in relative to the Toyota Hilux, you're absolutely right. It is more expensive. But for example, Soviet and Russian equipment is cheaper than NATO equipment. Some people would say that NATO equipment is just expensive garbage. It doesn't do the job necessarily. And it's not that up to par anymore as it used to be. But anyway, um, the climatic battle would result in only around 50 Chadians killed compared to 800 Libyans, and dozens of the Libyan tanks were destroyed. The Libyan Air Force would engage in bombing raids, but the Chadians would frequently hide their vehicles in the extensive desert where the Libyans couldn't find them. As well, their aircraft frequently just didn't fly, as there remained a fear that the French Air Force which had attacked Libyan airfields in 1986, would shoot them down if they did. Despite a Libyan victory in the far north, the Chadians would be able to raid into Libya itself for the first time, destroying the key airbase of Ma'atan as-Sarra. Okay. So, at this point, France stepped in to mediate a ceasefire before Habré dragged them into an invasion of Libya itself. They didn't want to go into conflict with Libya either, France. They want to meet some sort of stalemate, right? Not stalemate, but an end, basically, during this period. But Gaddafi had been humiliated. The fact that Chad had crushed the Libyans and caused a reasonable chunk of the army to flee had ruined his ability to be seen as a major military power. The US had provided Chad with Stinger missiles, so the Libyan Air Force was now an empty threat. Yes, the Stinger missiles was also used later on well, not later on, during this period too, actually, in Afghanistan by the Mujahideen when the Russians invaded. But anyway, Gaddafi retained control over the Azul Strip. However, regardless of how much the Libyans tried, they couldn't stand against Habré. So they had to recognize him as the president. But yes, that's how it is in war. There are losers and winners. Even if they couldn't stand him, they had to recognize him as the president. The Aouzu Strip was then sent to the international court, where the Azuzu Strip. Yeah, my bad. I keep mispronouncing it. The whole issue regarding the Aouzu Strip was then sent to the International Court of Justice for a mediation. Habré himself was overthrown by one of his field commanders, Idris Deby, who was killed in 2020. When was he killed? Let me just check real quick, because that is oh, here it is. My bad, guys. My computer is super slow sometimes. I don't know what the fuck is going on here. Good lord, this is embarrassing sometimes, bro. What happened to quality products from Apple, huh? Embarrassing. Anyway, uh, Idris Deby. Let's see here. You know what's funny? It turns slow right when I'm having a recording, man. That's kind of annoying. It is what it is. Um, his son Mohammed Deby took over. 2021. That's when he was killed. Um, And he's actually married to one of the Janjaweed leader's daughters, Amani Hilal. This is quite funny because back in the day, the Janjaweed would target Idris Debi's ethnicity in Darfur, which is the Zakawa. But yeah, so 20th of April on Hitler's birthday, that's when he was killed, 2021. And he was killed on the border to Libya by FACT rebels. So that's how that is. But let's stick to the topic, man. Let's stick to the topic. And in 1994, the strip was voted to be returned to Chad by 15-1. Libya complied and the conflict ended. Habre, though, he was accused of, he was guilty of a lot of human rights abuses in Chad. That's why they refer to him as the African Pinochet. Now, I'm gonna go through the history of the rapid support for it because this is what their name is now. I'm gonna go through them and then we're gonna go through the roots from what organizations and environment they kind of sprung out of a little bit. Okay, so the RSF evolved from the Janjaweed, which fought an insurgency conflict in the 2000s in the Darfur region. And they were used by the Khartoum government to squash this insurgency in northern and western Darfur primarily. And it was supported by the president of Sudan, which was at that time President Omar al-Bashir. And these Janjaweed, they were used as it was used to help the army, basically, to put down this rebellion. More than 2 million people were displaced, my bad, and as many as 300,000 people were killed between 2003 and 2008. So the International Criminal Court accused the government officials and Janjaweed commanders of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity in Darfur. As the forces grew, they were used as border guards to clamp down on irregular migration. Hemedti's business interests also expanded with the help from Bashir. And Hemedti, if we go back again, is this guy right here. He is the current leader of the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces. He is from the Mahamit Tribal Federation in Darfur. But he has also made a lot of money via gold mining, infrastructure projects, and livestock, as well as hiring his fighters to fight in, for example, Yemen. And he did in 2015. He began sending troops to fight alongside the Saudi and Emirati troops, allowing Hemedti to forge ties with the Gulf powers. And they were fighting against the Ansarullah, or as the mainstream public know them as, the Houthis. So in 2017, a law legitimizing the RSF as an independent security force was passed. So they're basically a paramilitary, right? According to military sources, the army's leadership had long expressed concern about the development of Hemedti's forces. This is where the conflict between Hemedti and General al-Bukhari, I think his name is, Burhan, sorry, Abdel Fattah Burhan, that he wants to integrate the RSF into the Sudanese army, but Hemedti, he refuses. So, but anyway, in April 2019, the RSF participated in a military coup that ousted Bashir. Later that year, Hemedti signed a power-sharing agreement that made him deputy of ruling council headed by Army General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. Before signing in 2019, activists accused the RSF of participating in killing dozens of pro-democracy protesters. Rights groups also accused RSF soldiers of tribal violence. Hemedeti removed immunity for some, following allowing for their prosecution. Last year, he made an apology, but it was very, I guess, not that detailed exactly what he apologized for. But anyway, he didn't really elaborate in detail. That's what I meant. Uh, I got this information from Reuters, by the way. They made a good compilation or summary of the RSF. But anyway, the RSF participated in a coup in October 2021 that halted the transition to elections. Hemedeti later said he regretted the coup and swung behind an internationally backed deal for a transition towards elections under a civilian government. So, the Sudanese government and many so-called pro-democracy protesters wanted the integration of the RSF, as I said, into the regular armed forces. This fueled the tensions over the transition plan that erupted into fierce clashes in Khartoum on April 15th. Since the war broke out, residents and rights groups and conflict monitors have accused the RSF and allied militias of perpetrating ethnically targeted attacks in Darfur. This would mainly be Western Darfur, where the Masalit people live. But anyway, they have also accused the RSF of deploying sexual violence and conducting mass looting in Khartoum. Sexual violence have been like a ongoing theme here in the war in Darfur, and it is a way for the Arab militias to sort of when they grape a woman, they do it because they want to Arabize her lineage. That's how I kind of understood it. A lot of the information that I also got for the slide came from a very good book by Alex de Waal. It's called, I think, the Darfur Genocide or something like that. But remember the name Alex de Waal. He had written, I think, 2 books on the subject matter. But he talked about that in detail. However, many people kind of like doubt him in other regards, in other conflicts. He's like a. I'm not sure though. I haven't looked too much into him as a person. But some people say that he is like a pro-NATO shill or some shit like that. I don't know. But he did acquire a lot of documents to write his book. So it seems pretty legit, at least this one. There's a lot of undeniable facts here. So, I mean, the RSF has denied accusations that it was behind the violence in Darfur and said the accusations of rape are being promoted by its opponents. It says it will hold to account any troops found to be involved in violations. Now, we're going to go through the organizations that the RSF kind of sprung out from, right? So, the main one is the Janjaweed. And where does the Janjaweed come from? It was formed after the well, a lot of its core top people were from the Islamic Legion, and the Islamic Legion was formed in 1972. During the Chadian Libyan War, Gaddafi used the Islamic Legion to regain the Uzu Strip. The goal of the Islamic Legion was to fight Israel, but also a tool for Gaddafi to create a greater Jamahariya in the Sahel and spread the Arab culture and Islamic religion. It's almost like the Muslim. It's a little bit like the Muslim version of the French Legion. I think that's the kind of idea behind it. So it was deployed in the late 80s and 70s in Chad, but it also saw action in the Lebanese Civil War, and it supported Idi Amin's invasion of Tanzania. It consisted mainly of Sahelian and South Asian migrant workers, but also Bedouin Arabs, Tuaregs, and Sakawa people. And a lot of the members were fed or brainwashed with Arab supremacist propaganda, And they would carry this propaganda to heart after the Legion was disbanded after the Libyan-Chadian War ended in 1987. So, simultaneously, the Tajamu al-Arabi was formed, and it has its roots from both the Islamic Legion and the Kash, also known as the Kayan al-Shumal. Kash was formed in 1976 after then President Numairi was nearly toppled by a black military officer. Its purpose was to ensure that the power in Sudan was to remain within three Arab tribes. That is to say, the Ja'alin, Shaigia, and Dangala, right? So, regardless of ideology, right? And for the last 40 years, the Kayan al-Shamal, or Kash, was spearheaded as a project of, or has spearheaded the project of Arab Islamization of Sudan. And for them to pursue this project, they needed foot soldiers, and they supplied, and they one of those organizations that they could use was Arab Congregation, or Tajamu al-Arabi. It's translated to Arab Congregation or Arab Gathering, one of these two. The might of the political dimension of the Arab Congregation was chillingly demonstrated in Darfur in the early 1980s. So, following collapse of Numairi's regime, Khartoum government connived with Gaddafi and his disastrous gamble in Chad to turn Darfur into one of their daring crusade to push the so-called Islamic belt into Black Africa. I wouldn't personally call it Islamic belt, but perhaps the Arab belt, because a large portion of Africa, well, Black Africa, is Muslim, but whatever. Gaddafi located his Islamic Legion under the command of Sheikh ibn Omar in the Masalit land in western Darfur after he was kicked out of Chad. The Legion, whose recruits were sourced in Chad, Mali, and Niger, that is to say, Arabs from these areas, but also as far as Mauritania, destroyed the area and its indigenous inhabitants, right? Settlers of the Islamic Legion in Darfur were later to play a prominent role as the Janjaweed, effectively executing Musa Hilal, which is that guy. Sorry, why am I even pointing? It's this guy here. To change the demographics of Darfur and empty it of African tribes. And they talked about that in one of their manifestos, Quraishi 1, also Quraishi 2, where they talked about killing the Zurga, which is a derogatory term in Sudan for blacks, so to speak. And I'm using the term black and Arab here very interchangeably for a Western audience to understand that black means something else for some people in different societies. The Arabs of Sudan are technically black too, because their ancestors intermarried with Africans. So, but they identify with the Arab tribes, so to speak, that migrated there. However, in 1980, Numairi appointed Ahmad Ibrahim Diraige as the governor of Darfur, which is this guy. And he was the first Furwa, or Fur, to hold post since Ali Dinar, which is this guy. So, during the 1980s, the force gained greater representation in the local government, occupying most of its posts and institutions, something that displeased Arab Darfurians. Between 1984 and 1985, a horrific famine devastated Darfur, causing more than 100,000 deaths and many more displaced. Famine, drought, and the struggle for the region's natural resources sparked peasant revolts and encouraged ethnic conflicts between the nomadic Arab camel herders of Sudan and Chad, which is to say the Abala Arabs, and the more sedentary Furs. Inter-ethnic tensions escalated to the point of war by 1987, and this is what they call the War of the Tribes, I believe. That year, a group of Arab tribal leaders from Darfur, using the rubric Tajamu al-Arabi, addressed an open letter, this is the one we're talking about, to Sadiq al-Mahdi, announcing an underrepresentation in regional government. Despite rising tensions, al-Mahdi ignored Tajamu al-Arabi's demands and appointed Tijani Sese of Fur as governor. Tajamu al-Arabi interpreted this as a provocation, and in response published a manifesto, as I told you before, titled Quraishi 1. And they talked about murdering black tribal leaders and intellectuals and whatever. The proclamation marked an escalation in the ethnic conflict and is considered to have marked the start of the War of the Tribes. So, in 1988, the Janjaweed emerged. It consisted mainly of Abala Arabs from north, but they also recruited from Bagara Arabs, which is to say cattle herding Arabs from the south. After the war, Sheikh ibn Omar retreated to Darfur. He was hosted by Musa Hilal, Sheikh Musa Hilal, who was the new tribal chief of the Rize Iga tribes of northern Darfur. Hilal's task was to smuggle weapons to Umar's forces in Chad. Umar's camp was destroyed in a Chadian-French incursion. However, the weapons were still in the hands of this Mahamid tribal federation, which the Rize Igat is a part. So in the 1990s, the Sudanese government tolerated the Janjaweed, and its main goal at that time was to control grazing land. But in the early 2000s, there was a threat of insurgency in western and northern Darfur. So they started also recruitment of Bagara Arabs, which you can see here. These are examples of Bagara Arabs. They also live in Cameroon, Chad, and northern Nigeria, right? They're also known as Shuwa Arabs in these countries. But they started to arm the Janjaweed, this is to say the Khartoum government, after the threat of the insurgency, as I told you. So that is pretty much the causes and the history of the war in Darfur. We're switching back to me again. There you go. And there you have it, folks. A combination of climate change, mix that in with, chauvinism and racism, and you got a whole problem. But this type of tribal warfare is not really only for Sudan. I mean, the conflict between sedentary people and nomadic people is something that you see across the Sahel. For example, we talked about Mali before. Mali has a conflict there as well. Like the Arab Tuareg and the Fulanis are at war with sedentary people. For example, the Fulani have been at war with the Dogon. There's been numerous uprisings as well in Niger, right, by different organizations. They weren't just Tuaregs or Arabs. There was Fulanis. There were Tebu people. And a lot of these people feel like they have been neglected by the state, and they're not receiving the benefits of the resources that is under the earth in these areas. To be frank, majority of people in Africa really don't. So, I mean, it's not just unique for them. But in the case of Mali, for example, it went so far that the Tuareg and the Arabs wanted, for example, they wanted an independent state, the Azawad, which is unlikely to happen. It's kind of like a Kurdistan situation. I mean, you're gonna be surrounded by enemies, and you have no access to the sea. Uh, it's not feasible. Um, but you can always argue for better representation. You can always argue for uh, more economic development, and that's more uh, uh, rooted in reality, in my opinion, rather than having an independent state. So I want to thank you guys for taking your time to listen. I hope this was educational for you, and I will probably continue doing PowerPoint presentation style type videos instead of the regular me talking into the camera with my hot monotone voice. So I won't bore you anymore. But thank you guys. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and I'll see you in the next one.